Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we're reviewing Nick Castellanos' 2024 season. A very interesting one. We'll also get into free agency beginning.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on 97.5 The Fanatic doing sports talk radio for 5 years in this city. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing wherever you consume your podcast on Locked On Phillies if you enjoy the show. And if you enjoy the show on YouTube and watching the video version, please make sure you're hitting that subscribe button so you get new notifications when episodes are posted. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today, we are going to review Nick Castellanos' 2024 season. Another one of those really, really interesting ones. Like, how do you evaluate this guy? So I'll try and break that down. I'll give you my thoughts. We're also going to look at the offseason for him and see if it's another tumultuous one. Because last year, we know they tried to – there were reports they tried to move the contract, and then they said they were still – they wanted to keep him. It was weird. We'll break that all down as well. And free agency begins today, so we'll also get into that. It's a busy show here on Locked On Phillies. So let's jump right into that Nick Castellanos conversation. He had up and down is it's not even a strong enough term to describe Nick Castellanos' 2024 season. Here's what's very interesting when we look at the numbers, right? So he finished batting .254. That's not ideal average-wise at all. But he hit 23 bombs. And then you look at WAR, and this is why. So we've talked about some guys in the past as we've gone through these player evaluations. It's like, oh, he had like a 3 WAR season. That's pretty darn good. And then I always tell you, I'm not a huge WAR guy because Nick Castellanos had a .8 WAR in 2024, which I know he had a really slow start to the year. And he probably had negative WAR to start there. And then the back half of the year when he picked things up, that probably brought him back up into the positives. But I mean, I can't believe Brandon Marsh had more WAR than Nick Castellanos. I guess defensively, a lot comes into that. But Nick Castellanos did, defensively, he's not going to make any amazing plays. But he did have that long streak where he had, the longest errorless streak in almost the history of baseball. And part of that's because he doesn't get to a lot of balls outside of his reach, but he makes some nice plays out there in right field. He plays a very solid right field for the Philadelphia Phillies. So that's why WAR is kind of crazy. But let's break down some of the other numbers when it comes to his 2024 season and compare them to some of his all-star years. 2021 and 2023, the 2 times that Nick Castellanos was an all-star. And in those years, he batted .309 and .272. So .254 is a drop-off on the average front. We knew that. He had 139 strikeouts, and that is down from 185 in 2023. So he cut that down by almost 50, which is really awesome to see. He had 5 more walks. That's good. Ultimately, Nick Castellanos was more selective at the plate in 2024 than he was in 2023. So anyone who was freaking out last year over that, and rightfully so, striking out 185 times, you saw that improve this year. Oh, my goodness. Also, what am I even doing? We'll run through a little bit more of the numbers, but I just saw a number that completely jogged my memory that I honestly forgot about for a second, right? You get caught up in how the Phillies lost to the Mets and the offseason, evaluating all this stuff. Nick Castellanos played all 162 games. He played every last one of those suckers. Talk about availability. You don't see it very often. That is such an awesome accomplishment in this day and age. Everybody over the age of 50, their brain just exploded because you're looking at a guy that does something that not a lot of players do anymore, and probably a lot more players should do. But I'm not going to do the whole, why do players take days off thing? That's an argument for another day. All I'm going to do is laud Nick Castellanos for playing all 162 and going out there and being the Iron Man for the Phillies this year. That's something that cannot be lost in the evaluation of his 2024 season. It's an old cliche, but the best ability is availability. And Nick Castellanos was the most available Philadelphia Philly in 2024. All right, back to the numbers. Let's look at some of the power numbers, right? Because he had 23 bombs. He had 29 in 2023. I don't really mind that drop off of power because Nick Castellanos is not he's not a 30 home run a year guy. He's not. That's not what he's here to do. He's here to be 20 to 25 with doubles power and create some RBI opportunities. And he created some RBI opportunities. He had 86 this year as opposed to 106 last year. That's 20 less. Now he had 6 less home runs, so that definitely makes a difference. He also had 7 less doubles this year. 37 last year, 30 this year. So the power number's down a little bit, but he had 2 more triples. So did Nick Castellanos get faster? No, I don't think he got faster. Triples are fluky, especially in a ballpark like Citizens Bank Park, where the Phillies play half their games, obviously. But I don't know. The power numbers drop a little bit. The strikeout numbers drop a little bit. The walk numbers go up just a tick, just slightly, and he plays all 162. So are we seeing a redefining of Nick Castellanos' approach at the plate? Probably not as drastically as a lot of fans would like to see, but the numbers would indicate that he's becoming more of a contact hitter comparatively. But then the average is down because of the start to the year where he couldn't get anything going. There was a lot of light, weak fly balls, ground balls, strikeouts, and then he got hot near the end. So that's kind of the regular season breakdown. That's what we're going to look at. Now, another thing is just like Nick Castellanos is a streaky hitter. So when you play all 162, that gives you more plate appearances, which means you have more chance for a guy like Nick Castellanos to have a thing or two go wrong with the average. And at the start of the year was mainly the issue, right? It was actually more impressive that with how many games he played, so many things went right at the end of the year. We talked about JT Realmuto and how he might need to take some time off this coming season if they get a proper backup at the catcher position because he's aging and that could have led to decreased production. Nick Castellanos instead, he played all 162 and he got stronger as the season went on. The numbers are one thing, right? And the one other thing that I want to bring up, Nick Castellanos is signed through the 2026 season. So he has 2 more years on his contract. We're going to talk about that coming up, whether or not that contract is actually played out as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies. That will certainly be a debate that we have this offseason. We're going to have it next, actually. But so he is under contract, so you can expect Nick Castellanos to be back, right? Well, we'll see. Hold your horses. But the funny thing with Castellanos is there was a month and a half to almost 2-month stretch of the season where he was the guy that kept this team afloat. And it was when the team was in their deepest, darkest spot. When they went in their post-London collapse phase of the regular season, Nick Castellanos was one of the guys who was figuring it out at that time while the rest of the team was losing it. And that was really important to help them do what they could do to find a win or two in that stretch, right? They weren't winning consistently. They weren't playing comfortable baseball, but they were in a spot where Nick Castellanos was the best player on that team, or I should say the best hitter on that team. And then in the postseason, he was unbelievable. And he followed up postseason last year where he almost single-handedly sent home the Atlanta Braves. And now Bryce Harper played into that too. But then in this year, he was very good against the Mets again. So Castellanos is an Iron Man who played all 162. He's a guy that doesn't make errors out in right field. He's a guy that has cut down on some of the numbers that have bothered people, like the strikeouts or increased the walks. He's a guy that was clutch in the postseason. He was a guy that was stabilizing when the team was kind of fluttering when it came to their ability to find wins. He had a really, really big season for the Philadelphia Phillies. And the numbers don't do enough to tell you the story of Nick Castellanos' 2024 season. So I have just talked myself into. I was thinking something around like a C+ for Castellanos. And going through that, I have just talked myself into. I'm going to give Nick Castellanos for the 2024 season, I'm going to give him a B. Now, I can't give him an A. He's had all-star seasons before. He's not an all-star this year. He wasn't even close to being an all-star this year. And the numbers, some of them need to go back up to where you saw. The average definitely needs to go back up for Nick Castellanos. But what he did for this team the numbers don't quite show you. And playing all 162, that matters to me. And that should matter to you. And it should matter to the organization. And frankly, he's a guy that this team needed this year, or they would have been in an even tougher spot when it comes to seeding. So Nick Castellanos, I'm giving a B compared to expectations for his Philadelphia Phillies season. Now, what I will do for when comparing him to right fielders around baseball, and there's some pretty darn good right fielders around baseball. We may talk about one coming up later on in the episode that plays up in New York, or at least played up in New York this past year. Bottom line is, according to his comparison to other major league right fielders, I'm going to give Nick Castellanos we'll go B- for that one. I could probably go C+, but I'm going to go B- because I'm feeling generous today. Maybe it's because the Eagles won. But B+ B for his grade compared to his expectations. B- for his grade compared to major league right fielders. And you might look at the numbers and say that's crazy. I think I just laid out a pretty darn good argument why Nick Castellanos actually did have a pretty important year for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2024. Coming up next, though, we're going to talk about if that's the last of Nick Castellanos we'll see in a Phillies uniform. And I'll tell you, I don't know, but last year something that happened in the offseason means we have to have this conversation. We'll have it next as we continue Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel, though, because you need to get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL schedule with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5. You can get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. You can also do your pregame parlays, your futures, all kinds of stuff. Let me tell you something right now. This is the time of year you need to do this. I am not great at betting on the NFL. And listen, it's a tough gig. You can win 55%. You're doing pretty darn well. You're making money. That's even the professional sports gamblers. I am on our radio show, Kincaid and South Cheers. I'm 14 of my last 16 NFL picks because this is the time of the year where teams start to show you who they are. You start to get enough information to make some wins. And you can also bet in the middle of games with FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. If I'm winning, you can win. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk about the future for Nick Castellanos, which could be a bit of a scary thing for him. Now, I don't think anything's really scary for Nick Castellanos. That dude, we talk about low heartbeat guys on this team like Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez. Nick Castellanos is another one where that dude is just cool, calm, and collected all the time. Well, collected, maybe not if he gets a low outside breaking ball. See, now that was a low blow. I didn't need to do that. But bottom line is, I don't think Nick Castellanos wakes up every day and worries about whether or not he'll be in Philadelphia because that just doesn't seem to be the personality of the individual. But last offseason, some very interesting reports started to circulate about the Phillies looking to trade Nick Castellanos to offload that contract to try and get better because you remember, forget about the most recent postseason collapse. The NLCS, which saw the whole team go completely cold against the Diamondbacks in the biggest spot of their season, a lot of that was put on guys swinging and missing and not having good approaches at the plate. And Nick Castellanos was probably the most egregious example of that in 2023. Now, he was awesome in 2024. And he was great in 2023 against the Atlanta Braves in the NLDS. But bottom line is, there were some reports circulating that Nick Castellanos could potentially be traded. The Phillies were looking to offload that contract. And the problem was not, oh, well, nobody wants Nick Castellanos. It's with 3 years left on that contract, were you able to move Nick Castellanos? Remember, they signed him to a 5-year deal worth $100 million. So there's money on there that you're going to have to dish out. And the Phillies might have to eat a lot of that to move him. Do they want to do that? Will they try and make the team better? They ultimately decided that it was not the decision for last offseason, but now with 2 years left on the contract, there's less money added on. So will he be an easier contract to move? Will they look to move him? Will they look at the season that I just broke down for you and say, damn, this dude played 162 games for us and was really big in spots where we needed him. And, He improved some of the spots of his game that we wanted him to. How in the world would we trade him? How would we get better from trading Nick Castellanos? And yet, we're going to have a conversation when we talk about free agency beginning. And yes, we're going to have like a billion episodes. If you've been waiting for the JS episode, just use the initials. I don't want to say it yet. We're going to get plenty into it, okay? But we're going to talk about a certain fielder in the outfield that plays the same position as Nick Castellanos. And if that's something the Phillies think they can go get, well, yeah, then you're going to be looking at a situation where Nick Castellanos could be moved. So a lot of this depends on who's available. A lot of this depends on what the Phillies view wants. See, I incepted myself into saying it. What they view Nick Castellanos as. My gut feeling would be that Nick Castellanos is still a member of this baseball team in 2025. I don't think he's going anywhere. Part of it is the contract. Like, I don't think he had a stellar enough year. Like, you realize how special his season was for the Phillies this year because of watching every game and feeling the emotions of a fan and understanding, yeah, the numbers don't look great, but when the numbers came in, we're clutch. But you don't look at that as a GM or president of baseball operations and say, well, okay, I don't really care that he hit 250. Like, they're still going to see those numbers and be like, well, is he worth the value? And I think a lot of teams are going to think how much money they're going to have to pay him. No. And I also think the Phillies are going to say, well, he's worth more than what the numbers show, so we should probably hang on to him. I do think that there will be a conversation about, well, how does the rest of the outfield shape up, and does that change Nick Castellanos' future? If you move on from Marsh, if you move on from Rojas, does it make you more likely to keep him? I think so. If you don't move on from those guys and you want to change something in the outfield and you have someone calling you about Nick Castellanos' contract and trying to trade for him, do you make that move for the sake of making a move? Potentially. Dave Dombrowski did say in his end-of-year media availability, Castellanos is still in their plans. And now he said that about Brandon Marsh, and I told you when we evaluated the left fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies. I don't know if I totally buy that, because we've seen front office executives before say, no, we really like this player. He's in our plans. He's not going anywhere. And that is so that when teams call and they can say, yo, did you hear me talking about him? We really like this guy. It's the old money ball. I really like, I forget his name. We'll just say Anderson. You don't even know who he is. Like, so you want to talk up players, whether you're going to trade them or not. You want to make it seem like you want to keep every player so that their value is higher. So I would assume that Nick Castellanos is going to be on the Philadelphia Phillies roster in 2024. I don't think it's likely that they move on from him. Do I think it's possible? More so than a lot of players. I will say that. I would say if Bryce Harper has clearly a 0% chance to be traded because he has no trade, no opt-out, whatever. Nick Castellanos, 35% chance, 30 to 35% chance. That's not nothing, right? But it's not likely that Nick Castellanos is moved. I'd even go lower than that. I'd 25%. I'd say like a quarter chance that Nick Castellanos is no longer with the Philadelphia Phillies after this offseason. But I didn't think he'd get moved last year, and those rumors gained more and more steam as the offseason went on. So you never know what's going to happen. You never know who's going to become available. You never know who could play right field potentially for the Phillies if they look at signing somebody. So you could be in a situation where this changes. But I do think Nick Castellanos is an important part of this locker room. He's an important part of this team. He did enough this past year for the Phillies to be comfortable to trot him out in the outfield in 2025. It's still crazy that we're talking about 2025. And I think Dave Dombrowski does value that. And I think Rob Thompson really values a guy like, which this is going to sound ironic. You got to listen to me on this one. I think Rob Thompson, who was, again, he got his extension this year. He's signed through 2026 as the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. I think he really values that Nick Castellanos went out and played 162. You can say, oh, well, Rob Thompson's a guy who likes to do the give-up lineup, who likes to give guys rest. Why would he care about that? He seems to be the opposite of the type of coach that would care about it. One, he's a baseball lifer. He's seen guys that have played 162 before. He knows the old school mentality of the game. Whether he employs it or not, because he thinks it's what's best for his players or not, is a different argument. I know that Rob Thompson appreciates guys that want to go out there, because I've heard him talk about JT Realmuto in such glowing regard when he wants to go out there, even when they want to get him time off. Nick Castellanos did that this year. And also, I think he's an important player in that locker room. I really do. And I don't want to have the vibes conversation because that's a taboo topic right now with the Phillies because people make fun of it because it hasn't paid off with a World Series. But Nick Castellanos is an important part of that locker room dynamic. And I would love to see him back. And I think he's back in 2025. But we've reached the time of the baseball offseason. Yes, it's already here, only a couple of days after the World Series ended, where things can change and things can change in a flash. We'll discuss the start of free agency coming up as we wrap up today's episode. Let's talk about GameTime first, though, because GameTime is absolutely amazing. If you're going to anything this time of year, whether it's a football game, you're checking out the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, you're checking out, I don't know, comedy, concerts, theater, all of this great stuff that you need tickets for, GameTime is the place that you want to get those tickets. I went to watch the Flyboys down at the ice at the Wells Fargo Center on Saturday. And guess who I went with? Like people from Germany that were in town for my brother's wedding. And my mom, she needed to get like 7 tickets. You know what I said? Hop on to GameTime. You ever used the app before? She's like, no, I haven't seen it. I was like, well, thanks for listening to the podcast, Mom. But I gave her the promo code. She used promo code LOCKEDONMLB. She got $20 off her first purchase, and we got tickets to the game. We had a great time watching the Flyers. We had an unforgettable experience. So why is GameTime the place that you want to go? Well, not just because of that promo code that I'll tell you about in a second, but GameTime Picks has curation towards what you are looking for. It makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater. They have all-in pricing, so you toggle that feature. It shows you everything up front. You don't get hit by like those surprise fees at the end. You get the view from your seats before you go. They have the lowest price guarantee, where if you find seats in the same section and row for less, they'll credit you 110% of the difference, and they have great ticket coverage as well to make sure that your purchase is good to go come the time of the event or the game. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime Picks. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? It's game time. This is fun, folks. Now I know what you're thinking, right? You probably should have started off this episode talking about free agency. We're going to do a whole lot on free agency and available players and everything over the coming days, right? Free agency starting is not necessarily like that big of a deal because it takes time for stuff to get settled. Over the past couple days, over the weekend, really, what has happened is you had a period, as soon as the World Series ends, you can make trades. And you can also, you go through your options on players. Players can exercise their club option. Teams can players can exercise their player option, I should say. Teams can exercise their club option on players. So you figure out who's going to be a free agent, who's not, if there's any trades that happen to make that happen. And the Phillies actually did have a trade. You might have missed this over the weekend. But you got to pour some out for the homie, one of the legends of the 10-year playoff drought, Philadelphia Phillies. Scotty Jetpacks, Scott Kingery, traded to the Los Angeles Angels. Here's what I will say. Kingery got paid way too much too early. That was a bad decision by Matt Klentak. I don't really care if you root for Scott Kingery or not. We never really saw him at the major league level. But it sucks the way it played out for the kid who was pretty talented coming up as a prospect. Maybe you find something in L.A. So just like Mickey Moniak, I don't really think he's that good of a baseball player. But, hey, you're going to L.A. Let's see if you find something. Best of luck to Scott Kingery, I suppose. But he was traded. That was the only trade the Philadelphia Phillies made since the World Series ended. And now free agency begins. So it begins 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. So like just as this episode is coming out, posting it, free agency will be starting for Major League Baseball. And that's going to be a very, very interesting spot for the Philadelphia Phillies to be. They don't have a lot of things that they can change because a lot of their players are locked in, not just contract-wise, but like because you could always trade contracts. But they like a lot of these players in a lot of the spots they're in. So I wouldn't expect a flurry of moves. What I do know is that reports are that Dave Dombrowski in the front office of the Philadelphia Phillies, they have not ruled out making a big-time move in free agency. So I know where everyone's mind's going. Let's just talk about the guy real quick. And we will do a full episode on him, and we will discuss him all offseason. But Juan Soto is the absolute gem of free agency. There is no player more impactful available this offseason than Juan Soto. Now, will he ever make it out in New York? I don't know. My gut feeling is that if the Yankees don't pay Juan Soto the highest amount, they're insane, because I think he's a crazy talented baseball player, and he's young, and they just went to the World Series on the backs of him and Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. It was unbelievable. But that's for Locked On Yankees to discuss. Go ahead and check them out. Bottom line is, should the Phillies be interested in Juan Soto? Yes. Should every team in baseball be interested in Juan Soto? Yes. He's one of those players. This is Bryce Harper, Manny Machado. This is Shohei Ohtani. This is a top player in the game that is becoming available. And do you want to put your money where your mouth is, John Middleton? I want my blanking trophy back. Go make a competitive offer to Juan Soto. That's something that all Phillies fans are going to be looking for. And there's a much longer discussion about what that offer is going to look like. Or could look like, who all could be in, where his most likely landing spot. There's so much that you got to break down with Juan Soto to go ahead and get everything figured out about where he's going to land. So we will do that. But there are other players also out there. The Phillies have a decision between Jeff Hoffman and Carlos Estevez, who are both free agents. How do they work that out in the bullpen? They have decisions to make about how to round out the remainder of the bench and see if they want to keep their bench pieces where they want them to be. Do you need to upgrade in the bullpen at any spots? Do you need to upgrade in the outfield at any spots? Is it a depth guy, or do you go sign a starter? If it's not Juan Soto, they may still do it. Do you make trades to create opportunities? Because trades are now on the table. The 4 or 5 days after the World Series are just like light news days. Not a lot of activity happens. The Scott Kingery trade was a little bit surprising that it happened at that time, but whatever. Like they make the move, make that happen. But it doesn't affect the major league roster. Like Scott Kingery was in the minors for the past 4 or 5 years. Now is where things get going. Now is where everything heats up. Now is where, okay, at 5 p.m., as soon as they can start talking, negotiating, signing free agents, we're going to, for the next couple of months, hit a flurry of moves. And it's not just ones that affect the Philadelphia Phillies, too, right? Free agency, we do Locked On Phillies. So we're going to be talking about the Phillies moves. But listen, if Juan Soto goes to the Mets, you don't think we're going to talk about that? You don't think that's going to affect the Phillies ceiling? Like if Garrett Cole leaves the Yankees and comes to a National League team, like you're looking at situations where a lot of stuff could change. Excuse me. A lot of stuff can change quickly. And Garrett Cole may have already exercised his option, or the team may have exercised their option on Garrett Cole. Let me just double check that real quick. Yes, I know he has there's the option there with that contract. So I want to make sure I have this right, just so people don't rip me in the comments. They have agreed to stay wow, that's a weird tweet by John Heyman. I'm reading this from 7 Minutes right now. Garrett Cole and Yankees have agreed to stay together. What are they, in a relationship or something? But they updated contract terms. Whatever. Again, I'm turning into Locked On Yankees here. But there are big-time name players that are going to be available out there, and we'll see how many are interested in the Philadelphia Phillies, how many the Philadelphia Phillies are interested in, and if there's any weird shakeups. Because what you may see is you could see a trade first to open up an opportunity to sign somebody. Or what you could see is you could see a signing and then a trade of a player that now is just like if the Phillies sign Juan Soto, someone in the outfield is moving, clearly. And then you wonder, well, okay, you probably would have a trade in place for Nick Castellanos to move because his contract is way more expensive than Brandon Marsh and Yohan Ross, who are both they haven't hit free agency, so they haven't gotten paid yet. They're still in the arbitration or pre-arb phase. So you'll see the dominoes start to fall starting today at 5 p.m. And it's a fun time of the offseason because this is where you start to see who's going to make major differences. Last year for the Philadelphia Phillies, we got excited about Whit Merrifield, and that was late, but it didn't really pan out. And we're like, okay, well, that kind of sucks. But then, I don't know, David Dahl was big in some middle of the season games for the Philadelphia Phillies at points. That was a guy that you signed in free agency that people didn't give a lot of thought to, that you balance some things out. You look at what happens in free agency. It may not seem huge now, some of these moves, but there will be times in the season where you say, okay, we got this guy this offseason. He makes a couple plays here or there. He was totally worth it. Or like with Merrifield, he wasn't worth it. So it can determine the ceiling of a team. and that starts today. So we'll keep you updated on free agency news as we continue to do. We will continue to do player evaluations. We've gone through all the position player starters. Now we're going to go through the starting pitchers coming up next. So we'll do. There'll be an easy one. We'll do a free agency extravaganza show about the strategy the Phillies should undertake with free agency beginning tomorrow. So if you want to know the overview, and then we'll do a pretty quick, easy evaluation of Zach Wheeler at the end of tomorrow's episode too, because that one is as cut and dry as it gets. But that's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you very much taking the time out of your day. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that helps us out on Locked On Phillies, and they get you notifications so you can get caught up on all our content. And I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.